And of course, there will also be a national appraisal committee that will look at the election results, what we did right, what we did wrong, what we need to improve on, and the process to implement any change. Uh, Now I'm going to ask the leader of the party to give a more general overview of the elections and the way forward. So, Noni.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, good morning. I wish to thank all who supported our election campaign, all of our 63 candidates and their campaign teams, our party workers, our supporters who came out and voted for our candidates, our bloggers, our donors and contributors, our election day workers, our police, military. We increased our vote nationally in this election by over 97,000 Jamaicans. And we doubled the number of seats that we hold in Parliament from 14 to 28. Our team in Parliament is strong, and we will be a formidable force in the Parliament of the land to hold the government to account and to defend the rights and interests of the Jamaican people. I am happy to announce that all our MPs elect, except for one who is traveling abroad, have signed a letter to the Governor General confirming their support for me to be appointed leader of the opposition. Since the election, our party has been active. A meeting of the officers of the party was held yesterday to discuss the way forward and internal issues that we need to chart a time frame for related to things like our various internal conferences, annual conference, and so on. This was followed by another gathering of our candidates and the national campaign team to thank everyone for their efforts and to have initial dialogue around the conduct of the elections in each constituency. Written reports from each constituency team will be required and further evaluations are to follow. And the General Secretary mentioned a appraisal committee which will be constituted to do an overall in-depth assessment of what took place. And our executive committee of the party will recommence its meetings on Monday coming. I now want to address the widespread concerns that have been expressed in the public domain about the conduct of the general election last week, Wednesday, the 3rd of September, 2025. As a responsible political movement that is committed to nation building and national development, it was important that we should await having reliable information before speaking to these issues, rather than proceeding on raw emotion and hearsay. Having waited for the final count to establish the official results in each constituency, including ascertaining the number of spoiled or rejected ballots and how these were apportioned between the two parties, the advice that we have received from our lawyers who attended the final counts is that a magisterial recount is unlikely to change the outcome in any of the seats. In the case of West Central St. Andrew, however, the nature of the irregularities which took place there is being carefully scrutinized in anticipation of a case being brought to the constituted authority for appropriate relief. I won't be able to answer more questions on that today. That matter is with our lawyers. While we don't have sufficient evidence to mount a legal challenge against the outcome of the elections, we are nonetheless deeply concerned at the extensive and I would say vulgar use of state resources to impact the outcome of the election over the campaign period. Specifically, the massive political advertising paid for by ministries, departments, and agencies of government during and up to election day at the cost of taxpayers to benefit the incumbent JLP administration is problematic. And we are going to have to, as a nation, look at the way in which public resources are used in support of political uh, achievements in the election period. We're also concerned about the unprecedented scale of distribution of benefits, black tanks, fertilizer, building materials, cash, by both the state and the Jamaica Labour Party. And in some cases, it's very different to distinguish one from the other. And we have received numerous reports of widespread suppression of PNP votes across marginal constituencies, with reports of very large sums of money being paid. And this strategy was enhanced by the timing of the elections and related giveaways in the back to school week, when parents in low income families in particular are most vulnerable and could be financially induced to prioritize loyalty to their families and their children over party loyalties. A second concern we have is in relation to some aspects of the operations as conducted by the Electoral Office of Jamaica. We think there should be an independent inquiry into the operation of the 2025 general election, and it should be urgently undertaken uh, with changes implemented for future elections, because we need to improve the processes. In particular, the process that results in hours-long waits at many polling stations by voters who turn out to vote, frustrating electors and causing many to leave without voting. And this factor is exacerbated by the law, which only gives 3 hours as a window to employees to be away from their workplace during working hours for voting, which is clearly inadequate in Jamaica's modern realities when you consider the time for transportation to get to a polling station from the workplace, depending on where the person works and where they vote, and the lengthy delays in the lines in some polling stations. We also need to look at the use of finger inking. That was originally implemented to prevent multiple voting, but it currently facilitates voter suppression as persons are being induced financially to dip their finger in ink prior to the vote and then being paid not to vote. And we have several reports of this being done. We're also concerned about the black book, and we believe that the polling that is used in polling stations, it must be made available during the polling process for viewing by indoor agents and not left entirely to the presiding officer to identify voters who present themselves without IDs. Because if the presiding officer is operating in a way that is not satisfactory from an independent, impartial point of view, there needs to be the ability of the indoor agents on either side to scrutinize what is going on there. And the integrity of the voters list needs to be re-verified through a comprehensive re-verification of voters to clean it of dead voters in particular and other voters who don't have a place of residence in the constituency where they vote. We will be sending teams into those constituencies which were most affected by these issues to conduct a field survey. This survey will empower Jamaicans who experienced or witnessed these issues to share their experiences with us. Many persons are deeply upset by what took place, and this process will allow them to get some closure. It will also assist us to advocate for changes to the law and the processes of elections that will ultimately help to protect Jamaica's democracy from tactics that clearly affected the ultimate outcome of the 25 general election and which are not contemplated by the system that we have. I will now hand over to our legal advisor. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Party Leader. As you said at the beginning, and the General Secretary has commented, we are at this time not intending to have any magisterial recounts.
Other processes that are available, legal processes that are available, are being looked at based on the evidence that will come forward. I will just echo the point that you make about a review of the management of the election by the EOJ. I think after 30, almost 30 years of the system that was robust at the beginning, I think there is no concern that gaps are opening up and they need to be examined. And we will be doing so by the processes that you have outlined in the various constituencies and regions as well. So the other point really is the legislative and regulatory um, improvements that may well result from all of this, which is to ensure that the use of state resources um, prior to and during elections are much better managed. And I think there are clearly loopholes there, and we need to fill those gaps through the legislation and or regulation. And I believe that the point was well made by the abuse that we saw during this election. Those are the points I will add at this time.
Thank you, MP Hilton. No, so in relation to I know one of the media houses carried an article saying that we were going for a magisterial recount in two constituencies. I'm not sure where they got that report from because we did not give that information to the media. We know that on the night of election, you have a preliminary count, and in the days after, you have the final count, which we waited on so we could get what is the official result from the EOJ. And after looking at that, we realized that there were three constituencies: Central Kingston, East Central St. Catherine, and Northern Trelawney, where the number of rejected ballots were more than the margin of victory. However, when we consulted with the teams that were present for the final count, we were reliably advised by them that of the rejected ballots, they are split roughly evenly between the two main political parties, and therefore you would not get any material change in the result in the constituencies. And as a result of that, we took a decision not to pursue any magisterial recount. So that is the official position of the People's National Party. We do have some other concerns of acts of intimidation, aggression, and vandalism that would have taken place since the elections have been concluded, and specifically in South St. James, in the Anchovy Division, persons have been making threats about removing the water pumps, and I think they even made reference to using dynamite and other things like that to destroy the infrastructure. We've seen videos as well and heard voice notes of persons in Eastern Portland that would have made comments that resources would be limited to the newly elected Member of Parliament, Isaac Buchanan. We have seen as well in Southeast St. Mary, where there's been vandalism of a community center and the removal of certain infrastructure in that area. And probably the most concerning of them all is in South Trelawney, where a team from the Labour Party, led by persons in leadership, went to the house, the accommodation of our candidate, Paul Patmore, to threaten him. We believe that these things are intended to intimidate and weaken the democratic process within the country. And we are calling on the members of the Labour Party, the leadership, to rein in their supporters and for them to understand that we do believe in a democratic process and we have to accept the outcome. Similarly to how we have accepted the result at the national level, it can't be that they accept it at the national level, but at the constituency level, they are reluctant to accept that Isaac Buchanan did defeat Anne-Marie Vaz in a free and fair election that took place in East Portland, and that as the duly elected representative, he should be accorded with all the respect and the authority that should be conveyed on such a office. We also want to encourage our candidates across the length and breadth of the country to remove the paraphernalia that was put up during the time of campaigning. And some of our candidates will not have much to do because their opponents already removed them before the elections. But for those that still have up some material, we're going to ask them, use this opportunity to ask them to remove those paraphernalia from the different constituencies. And I know that the municipal corporations will be playing a role in ensuring that we can return to normalcy. The the matter surrounding West Central St. Angel is a matter, as was said by the leader of the party, that the legal team that has been engaged by our candidate is putting together their documents, and for further information on that, they will speak at a later date. And so we'll leave it at that, and I will now open the floor to get any questions that may exist. Who's monitoring this? Is it Nationwide or Riva? What is the appropriate name?
Siobhan Campbell, still Nationwide News. My question is to Mr. Golding. Based on the concerns raised, are you casting doubt on the legitimacy of the outcome of the 2025 general elections? And are you concerned that such doubts would raise speculation of Jamaican people and cast a shadow on Jamaica's electoral process?
I'm concerned about the widespread reports that we have received of voter suppression strategies that were employed, in particular to dissuade our supporters and in some instances our workers from voting, and in the case of workers from turning up in some instances for the elections. I'm not seeking to in any way suggest that we are not accepting that the government that has been elected will be duly constituted. I don't want to go down that road. I don't think that's a wise road for Jamaica. But I also think it's important that we don't sweep things under the carpet, which have become and which were in this election a significant factor at play. And the use of financial resources to suppress votes, based on what we have heard, these are now indirect reports. That's why we're going to go through a process of going into the field to hear from people directly what they experienced and what they saw. But based on the reports that we've received, this is a matter which really needs to be confronted by Jamaica's democracy, and certainly by our party going forward as to how we can try to respond to these types of tactics, which have become a central part of how our opponent operates in trying to secure power for themselves.
Let me just comment a little more on what the party just said, which is that in Guyana, recently there was a general election in Guyana on September 1. I think we're all aware of that. Coming out of that election, the EU delegation, the European Union delegation, has issued a report. And when I read the report, a lot of what they commented on and expressed concern about were actually at play, certainly complained of widely in the Jamaican situation. And that tells you that there are the question of the democratic process being legitimized is also a question of the various activities and the concerns and the issues that are raised that will affect the quality of the democracy. And I think that's a lot of the concerns that are being raised here and need to be pursued is around not just the specific legal aspects, but about some of the concerns and gaps that may have opened up in our electoral system that needs to be addressed.
Morning, Desmond Richards here, Rebel Radio. Mr. President, have you identified reasons why the party lost? And secondly, what are your concerns about the low voter turnout? And I would like to hear if the party has plans to encourage voters to hold their votes.
I would say that there's something perplexing about the voter turnout statistics, based on the fact that during the campaign, right through to the end of the campaign, the energy and enthusiasm on the ground was palpable, significant, and suggested that there would have been a stronger turnout. As indeed, the polls, right up to the last poll, which was published on the Sunday before the election, indicated that, based on the expressions of persons polled, they were expecting a significantly higher turnout. What happened on the day needs to be examined carefully. I think it was a combination of factors at play. I think that there were persons who didn't vote because the lines were long and slow, often in the hot sun, sometimes in the rain, and they got fed up and left. I think that the financial inducements of which I speak or have spoken were a major factor as well in dissuading some people from voting. In terms of why we didn't win the election, we lost it narrowly. If we had 4 more seats, we would form government today. And when we look at the seats that we have in mind, we lost all of those by less than 500 votes. And in all of those, some of the issues which I raised were prominent factors at play. So obviously, I don't want to prejudge what the appraisal committee will say based on their investigations. But as I said, the low voter turnout is a bit of a mystery as to why that transpired, given what we know and what we saw and what we felt during the campaign. I would say one other thing, which is that the voters list itself has not been cleansed comprehensively for over a decade. I can't even remember when the last proper re-verification. Early 2000. So it's probably 2 decades now since that was done. And given the nature of our population, how people move around, move to other parts of Jamaica to seek work, and that sort of thing, and the people who die, and there's no automatic removal of voters on there. The number on the voters list from which the percentage turnout is derived is a questionable number. And so the voter turnout statistic itself is necessarily understated. The degree of understatement is what we don't know.
And if I may add to that, the People's National Party polled an additional 97,000 votes over the 2020 elections. The Jamaica Labour Party polled 5,000 more over that time. And as has been said, if you look at some of our areas, there was significant suppression that took place in some of our areas by person inducing individuals in there not to go to vote. And with the long lines that were present at the polling station, there is a question for the ECJ to answer. Because if we had a turnout of only 39% and we had such long lines with such delays, one shudder to think what would have happened if the turnout had been 50%. Because significant delays took place on the day. I was on the phone from early with the director trying to resolve some of the issues. And you did have persons in those lines that turned away. So we lost 4 constituencies by less than 500 votes. Each of those constituencies have over 100 polling stations. It's just 5 persons in each of those that got frustrated and left that would have made that difference. And so it is a significant thing. And I think we have to resolve how we do this thing. I was third in line at my polling station and didn't vote until I was there before 7. Didn't vote until about 10 minutes to 8 before I completed the exercise. That's just not acceptable in my opinion. So there was a decision that was taken that persons that showed up without ID should have been placed in a separate line, and that you should have started the process from outside with an additional agent. That did not obtain in all constituencies. And so you had, in some cases, what appeared to be a deliberate attempt for persons to turn up without the IDs to deliberately slow down the process. And so there is a need for a proper review of the process, and for us to ensure that the elections are indeed free and fair, and that people can express their rights.
And I'll just add that if you anticipated a larger turnout, which the poll suggested we may have had, then the planning, it seems to me, was inadequate. The planning by the EOJ must have been inadequate, because in the event, only 39% or so turned up, and we had such
Well,
problems.
voted, not turned up.
Well, voted,
Yeah.
actually voted, and we had such problems. So, and low vote turnout. So I think the planning has to be questioned, and perhaps an audit is appropriate at this time as well.
Team are at CVM TV. We've seen at rallies there are crowds and a lot of support. Even with the big gains, how do you plan to keep the base energized after the back-to-back defeats, Mr. President, PNP President?
Well, after a campaign ends, there's a process of reflection, there's a process of analysis, there's a process of reconnection with our base and our supporters. And there's also, I think there are some reforms internally that we need to pursue as well to strengthen our overall organization. So the way in which we plan to handle the matter would be through a period of careful analysis of what took place and a recognition of where there are weaknesses that need to be strengthened, and the deliberate pursuit of changes that will strengthen those weaknesses. So, one doesn't energize the base from the start of a 5-year term of government. Energizing the base comes from the kind of process involved in campaigning. But what we need to ensure is that we stay in touch with our base, that we strengthen our constituents in divisional organizations, so that when the time comes, we're able to deliver an effective result. And we are starting now from a much stronger position than we have enjoyed over the previous 5 years. With just 14 in Parliament before, it was much more difficult. Only 14 MPs out of 63 were PNP MPs. Only 14 out of 63 PNP MPs got state resources through the Constituency Development Fund to help to do the work that they have to do. So it's moving from a very limited base in Parliament is difficult, and it required extraordinary effort to take us where we are now. With 28 seats to their 33, 35, I mean, the situation is much more balanced, and that will enable us to build on that to be even more effective next time around.
But you also pointed out partly that there'll be engagement in the field from now in the reviews. I believe, certainly speaking from my own constituents and from talking to others out of yesterday's meeting, that process of engagement will be helpful, because a lot of the concern and the sense of dejection that is there comes from some of these things complained of. And I think once you're on the ground investigating, giving people an opportunity to speak and to vent some of that frustration, I think that will be part of the process of healing and engagement with them. Part of the process of healing and engagement. So I think that process will be ongoing.
Morning again. Um, indulge me a couple of questions. One, given what you have described as acts of voter suppression, can you indicate whether or not the PNP has made a formal complaint about electoral fraud or irregularities to any state organ? And if so, in what constituencies? That's one. Two, can you indicate, sir, what is the projected spend for the People's National Party during this election campaign? Can you say also how was it funded and what percentage is corporate donation? And then finally, personally, Mr. Golding, is this disappointing for you? And if so, how disappointing?
So your first question was whether a formal complaint has been made to any state organ in respect of the voter suppression of which we speak. The answer to that is no. We are, as I've said, going into the field to do a survey so that we can get more tangible information rather than the indirect reports that we have been receiving. Through the reports we're receiving is really through both things like social media, but also more importantly through the campaign structures that we have. But we want to go into the field and get more, a more comprehensive survey of what took place. At that point, we can decide, where we go from here. There isn't really any state agency that is mandated to address that issue. That's one of the challenges we have. So it's that is something we'll have to consider carefully as the best way to proceed, to deal with this. Some of these things may require a strengthening of the electoral law itself, the Representation of the People's Act, which, to take into account the kind of methods and tactics that are being employed in this era relative to when that law was last amended or reviewed. Other things may just require an internal response as to how we manage that kind of process going forward. So that's my answer to your first question. Your second question was about campaign finance. Yeah. I haven't seen from our treasurer yet a final report on the level of funding raised and expended. Based on my assessment of it or knowledge of it, I would say most of the funding that we raised came from donors. Some are corporate donors, some are individual donors. And I'm very sure that they were within the overall envelope allowed by the law in terms of the limits. I can tell you that because I have a sense for the numbers, but I don't have the specifics. And the third question was about yeah, it's a mixed feeling. I feel pleased that we are on the up and up, that we have managed to double the number of MPs that we have in Parliament, that we are going to have a team in Parliament now that is going to be formidable as an opposition, given the people who won. And we have an excellent team. And the fact that we got 97,000 more votes this time than we got in 2020 is also significant as an increase. Our opponents got 5,000 more votes. So it was a definite improvement in our performance. Disappointment at the same time that we weren't able to deliver that final, 5 additional, well, call it 4 that we needed to just have 32, which is the threshold for winning. That was disappointing. And